Adding to the previous video, here's a shot of the Friedrichstrasse entry into East Berlin by way of the elevated train, the S-Bahn, hence the S in this picture. And from here, it was a short walk to the Coburger Hof. Okay, so in the previous tape, I mentioned that the Strausses lived in this town called Luckenwalde, and they would take out these black and white photos from their purse, and Ingrid would, and she'd show me some family shots there. It looked like a really nice house, unusual, for East Germans to live in their own house with a yard and trees. So it looked really nice. And as I say, it was really easy for me as an American to go back and forth between the two Berlins. But to go outside of Berlin and into East Germany proper to Luckenwalde required an elaborate bunch of paperwork. You'd have to fill out a form with the East German government to get a visa, and you'd have to explain where you're going, when you were going, how you were going to get there, time of arrival, time of departure, and this would eventually get filed with the local Luckenwalde police. And so Ingrid said, well, here's the form, fill it out. And oh, by the way, the only way you're going to get in it as an American is if you just sign on the line there saying you're a relative. I said, well, I'm not a relative. He said, well, you're engaged to Hita, so that's kind of like a relative. And I thought, oh boy, I was counting on the usual shoddiness of most bureaucracies to just take that at face value. I mean, how would they know? That was a little trepidation, but I did it anyway. I said, well, it'll be an interesting story. See if they arrest me. That'll be kind of an interesting story. I mean, I was that stupid. And let me do a little spoiler here. Nothing happened because of my signing that, but other things did, which is why I'm going to talk about this a little bit. So I did all that, and it was going to take place over the holiday we don't even know about anymore, called Pentecost and Pfingsten in German. That takes place in May. And of course, my attending classes was kind of a joke. You could do anything you want at a German university. You could show up or not show up. You could take classes and sign up for them, but that doesn't mean you had to go to them. And every now and then when you wanted to take a test in your subject, at least these were the rules then, you just tell your professors, well, I'm ready to take a test and get credit for this particular subject, and then you do that. And you carry around this Studienbuch, your student's book. I know I'm way off topic now, but so what? And you could go to different German universities and study something, and they fill up your Studienbuch. And so you move around. So there are people in the dorm or the little house I lived in the student village near the university, who are German natives who had been in the university system for 12 years and no end in sight. So anyway, it was no big deal for me to take time off, but officially Pentecost was a time when the university would shut down, people go places. So I was all set to head out to, I was going to go buy my train ticket and go meet these people. And I really didn't want to do it, to tell you the truth. I thought, oh God, sit around for like 3 or 4 days with all these ants showing up. And I didn't feel like fun, And so what kind of changed the whole deal is my buddy Geir Åkers, a Norwegian who lived in the same house 12 as I did, said, why don't you go to Norway with me and we'll play Monopoly and drink scotch, and you can see all the cute girls that live in my little town. And so I said, that sounds better than East Germany. So I wrote off a quick letter to Ingrid saying, sorry, I'm just not going to come. And I'm sure that pissed everybody off. She even mentioned when they were here in America how disappointed everybody was. Including among the disappointed person was this guy who had showed up at their front door. And my memory of it, and I'm sure this is me embellishing, he's standing there in a raincoat, and he's got all these pamphlet stuff in his pocket. He's holding some balloons, and he's from the International Peace League. And he understands that an American will be visiting pretty soon. He wants to welcome him, and here's some literature for him to read. And when he gets here, I'd sure like to talk to him. And so that was that. And so this guy I mentioned to Ingrid later because of the other things I'm about to tell you. And she said, I remember that guy now. Yeah, he was from this thing. And he was really disappointed when he did show up and you weren't there at our house in Luckenwalde. Okay, so fast forward to my time at Harvard. This meeting in Luckenwalde in '65. 3 years later, two FBI guys come into the German department at Harvard, and I'm taking out a class, and they say, we want to know why the KGB was interested in in meeting you in East Germany. And I said, what? I said, well, what did they want from you, and what did you do? And I said, what are you talking about? He says, well, we have reliable information that you were there, and they wanted to contact you. So what did you discuss? And so I had to explain to them I never even went. And then they did, but that didn't determine. So, well, tell us who this Mr. Strauss is, and who are these people, and how do you know them? So, me being slightly pissed off, and I was very much anti-war movement and the Vietnam thing, so I wanted to mess with them. So I gave them long, detailed stuff. I did a Freedom of Information Act request recently, and got all of their notations of that interview. And in it, they said very cooperative, very informative, and there's an indication on the side by J. Edgar Hoover himself saying, further explore or something like that. So I'll have to send you. Actually, I do have on the website that I've created for the family. There are pictures, there are screenshots of that. So J. Edgar Hoover himself was interested in Larry Johnson, the anti-war movement. Because President Johnson and he were convinced that the real Americans wouldn't be opposing the war, so the communists must be behind all of the brouhaha. And here I am visiting these commie people in East Germany. All right, so that's not the story, though. Here's the story. Yeah, that's the background. So fast forward to, 1980-something. I'm a lawyer in Seattle, and I have German clients. Thanks to the then President Consul General, the Consulate General of West Germany had an office in Seattle. They don't anymore, but then they did. And I befriended this one guy who really loved to drink and eat Polynesian food at a particular restaurant and hotel in Seattle. We get together often, and he gets super drunk. And he was sort of a crypto-Nazi. He was fighting. He wound up in Prague as a 15-year-old trying to figure out how to run anti-artillery or guns as part of the last-ditch effort to fight off the oncoming Red Army. And of course, he's lucky he didn't get killed. He wouldn't know what he's doing. They swept him up. But he took a shine to me because I was an American who was basically pro-German. I mean, I admire things German. And so he kind of took me under his wing and told me about all his stories. Anyways, so it was a great source of referrals. The Consulate General he was the consul. He was the second in line. The Consul General himself, I was some guy who just lived in a house and read things. But so one of the referrals, and they called me a Vertrauensanwalt, which is a distinction I think exists today. If you're a trusted lawyer, you're on a list of German-speaking lawyers that foreigner Germans can consult when they have problems in America. So anyways, as a result of this, they said, well, we want to refer you to this guy who's got a furniture shop in Bellevue. He sells these rustic Austrian furniture, rough-hewn, heavy wood stuff. So I went there to see the guy, and it was like a trip into Austria. I mean, the whole place had that Austrian look, all those red and white tablecloths and things in these chairs elaborately carved, they just look like they should be cakes or something. And so I met this guy, and he says, my name is Mr. Rupert, Herr Rupert. And we started speaking German right away. And he wanted me to collect a debt. There was some guy who hadn't paid him like $15,000. And he said, well, I've got the correspondence in English and German, and really nice meeting. He says, here, would you like to have a cup of coffee? And so we started yakking. And he asked, well, where'd you learn your German? And so I told him more than he wanted to know, including being in Berlin. And he said, oh, when were you in Berlin? I said, 64, 65. And he gave me this kind of cryptic look, and he said, I was there then too. And so he wanted to know more. And somehow we got around to his story. He was an Austrian, just like the consul general, I guess, the guy I was talking to you about. He was captured by the Red Army as a young soldier, still, in the fighting the last gasps. And somehow they were able to intimidate him. They threatened to imprison him for a false crime, something they just invented. They said, well, we're going to imprison you, or you can work for us, and then you'll be free, and you just have to do us a few favors. And so they tested him. And to make a long story short, he became more and more pulled into the grasp of the KGB. As a matter of fact, he finally wrote a book called "In the Claws of the KGB." That's both in English and German. He started saying, he said the only way I was going to get out of this trap. They sent him to Moscow for training and all this stuff. It's a fascinating book, and so. He said, the only way I was going to get out of this is by work my way up the organization, showing myself to be a true KGB guy, and then I would have enough information and documents so when I sought to defect, the CIA would see me as a valuable person with a lot of information that I had to trade, and they would give me asylum. So that was his plan. And and he started explaining what he was doing is that to prove himself as a good spy, he wound up in East Berlin, and his job, get this, was to get American students who look sympathetic to the socialist cause, to get them on, to recruit them and use them as spies or whatever, in the West. So he said, where were you going to? And I said, well, it's kind of interesting. And I told him the whole Look Involved this story. And I said, the last minute I didn't go. And there was this guy, my ex-wife's cousin said there was a guy came there with balloons and brochures and was very disappointed. And he said, that guy was me. How about that? He was the guy who was going to recruit me, even though he was on my side ideologically. He was going to use me as a pawn in his escape plan. And I just freaked out. I said, how is it possible that 25 years later, I would bump into you, we would exchange these stories? I mean, even the fact that you were that guy and I was that guy, how is it possible we'd even be talking about it? And so then he sent me a copy of the book, and it's on a website, and he's got a dedication to it. And here's another coincidence. For some reason, I was clearing out a bunch of books out of our basement and everywhere, and I looked at this one where he gave me the dedication. He says, well, I read this, I don't need it. No, I didn't. I know, I take that back. Somehow this book that he gave me with his dedication to me and everything, I got wound up with all these other books that Glenna would take and sell to these secondhand bookstores. So I was really sad when I realized the story I was going to reproduce for the website, and I didn't have that anymore. And so I went online, found a copy that I could order, used copy order on Amazon, and it comes back to me. And here's another one, here's another quinky dink. The book I get from Amazon is the book I had inadvertently lost. There it was with his handwriting in there, dedicating the book to me with a saying that I now forget, something like, only those who fight for freedom deserve it, or something like that, but it's there. Anyway, the long and short of it is I wrote all about this in a story called a Matryoshka of Coincidences. Matryoshka is the Russian peasant woman where you unveil one little mother after another until you start with this big wooden thing, and then you end up with this tiny little Matryoshka, this little mother. And so it's there to read, but I decided to make a video out of this because nobody reads anymore. So anyway, so much for this video. I don't know if you enjoyed the story, but I sure enjoyed telling it. Well, to be accurate, what he wrote was rather moving then and now. Only the oppressed man can truly appreciate The Value of Freedom. Best wishes to Larry Johnson. And he goes on to write, February 1987, Rupert Ziegel. Now, that wasn't his real name. He told me then. He wouldn't tell me his real name. He's still worried that at that time the KGB was out to get him because it was a major embarrassment at the time. And of course, I was only half joking about people not reading anymore. The Matryoshka doll of coincidences is available from the family website that my brother and I put together. And the link to that story, which is, I think, better told than what I just did, is in the description below.